recording. Okay, so remember what we were doing. So we translated the. So we were trying to count plane partitions inside a hexagonal subset of the triangular grid, and we translated this problem into family of non-intersecting lattice paths by choosing the starting points to be along the anti-diagonal, or if you want, along the line x plus y equal to 0 in the second quadrant, and choosing the starting points to be also along an anti-diagonal, but the precise values depend on the sizes of the size of the hexagon. So if it's an A by B by C hexagon, the number of paths will be A, and these coordinates are determined by B and C, as I showed. So and I argued that you will always get non-intersecting lattice paths. I didn't prove it rigorously, but this is something that can be done. Okay, so now I want to give a general formula for such for enumerating non-intersecting lattice paths. So so that's what I'm going to do now. So it's so what I'm going to describe now is self-contained. Okay. So as I said, we will now the result about weighted enumeration of non-intersecting lattice paths. In general graphs, digraphs. So let me describe the setup. So let G, which is the set. Remember, a graph is a set of vertices and set of edges. Be a finite. We will always talk about finite graphs. Directed. So unlike what we did earlier for Castellan's theorem, we are now talking about directed graphs, and also acyclic graphs, i.e. with no directed cycles. So as an undirected graph, I mean, if you forget the directions, then you could potentially have cycles, but with the direction, you're not allowed to have cycles. Okay. A path in G, I think we've already used these terms without definition, but let me be a little careful here. So a path in G is a sequence of vertices let's say E and G is a sequence of vertices. P equals V naught, V1, V2, to Vk, such that Vi plus 1 belongs to E for all I. Okay, so I'm using the tuple notation for an edge because this is a directed edge. So i.e. so Vi, there is an edge Vi to Vi plus 1. Okay, I'm not using the set notation. So for if the graph were undirected, this would be two element, an edge would be a two element subset, but now this is a tuple. Okay. So in addition, G will be edge weighted as before. I mean, as in Custodian's theorem. If so let every edge E in E have weight omega of E. Okay. The weight, let me use the same, be consistent in notation. So I'll call the path with a capital P. The weight of a path is the product of the weights as before, is omega of P. This is product I equals 1. It's the same P. The path P, I equals 1 to k minus 1, W of VR. Okay. Okay, so now we'll consider a family of paths. So let curly P P1 up to Pn be a family of paths. In G with distinct starting points S1 to Sn and distinct endpoints. E1 up to En. Okay. I think in principle it's okay for one of the endpoints to be equal to one of the starting points, but we will not consider such examples. Okay. So now I want to give a sign to such a family of paths. So, okay. So the weight of a family is, so let's say that explicitly. The weight of the family is W of P is the product I equals 1 to N W of Pi. And if the ith path, so we will say that the ith path which starts in Si, so that's our definition, which starts at Si. Right, so that's the definition of having of the ith path. If the ith path which starts at Si ends in E of sigma I for all I, where sigma is a permutation in Sn, then the sign of the family P is sine of is sine of sigma. Okay, this is standard sign of the permutation. Okay. Okay, so here is the key definition. The family P, as defined above, is said to be non-intersecting if no pair of paths in P has a vertex in common. Okay, so it's the natural definition. So the key theorem in this area is the following. Okay, so there are several names associated to it. So let me select. So it was originally stated in the context of probability by Carlin and McGregor in 1959. So there, okay, let me give all the names. I will give you the context. Then it was formulated by Lindström, Bernd Lindström, in 1973. But the combinatorial strength was realized by Gesell and Biano in 1985. So the proof is really elementary, but it's the idea that's really the strength of the theorem. Okay, so here's the theorem. So let G be a weighted directed acyclic graph with two families of disjoint vertices S1 up to Sn and E1 up to En. Let Pij be the weighted sum of paths from Si to Ej. Okay, so you take all possible paths from Si to Ej in G, and you sum over. I mean, for each path, the weight is the product of the edge weights, and you sum over all such paths to get Pij. Okay, so then the signed sum, signed weighted enumeration, let's say, of non-intersecting lattice paths. So we'll use this term, this phrase non-intersecting lattice paths several times. So we'll call them NILPs. P starting at S1 to Sn and ending at E1 to En is given by, so the left hand side is what I just wrote, so sum over P P sine of P, weight of P. This is a determinant. So this is the determinant of the matrix whose entries are Pij, where I and J run from 1 to 1. Okay. So the observation is that this signed enumeration is a determinant, and so this was found first in the context of Brownian motion and similar other Markov processes. So I'm not going to go into the details. In 1959 by Carlin McGregor. Carlin was a mathematical economist at Stanford. I think McGregor was a student. Then it was found in the context of matroids completely independently. Again, I'm not going to go into what matroids are, but these are an important gadget which is useful in many areas of mathematics. So it was found by Lindström in 1973. But the fact that it's useful for counting was realized again independently by Gesseling, and it's only sort of after their groundbreaking paper that people realize how powerful it can be, and in particular in the enumeration of plane partitions, it's all this technique and its generalization, which will come to at some point, solved many of the conjectures, open conjectures at the time in plane partitions. Then people realized that, oh yes, Lindström also had it, and then people realized it's also another rephrasing of this result. Although this result doesn't directly apply, so to this context, I mean this is often called the LGV lemma. I mean, it's really a lemma. I mean, it can be applied in many contexts. So one should really think of this as a lemma. Okay, so let's prove this. So so we'll expand the right hand side. Okay, so expand the RHS using Leibniz formula. So we'll expand this as a sum of permutations. So RHS is the sum over all sigma minus n sine of sigma product I equals 1 to n p of I sigma I. Okay. So let's interpret each term here. So each term here gives us a weighted sum over all paths starting at I and ending at sigma I. So this really corresponds to a family of paths. So each term is corresponds naturally. No, I don't know. Each term here is gives the weighted sum over all families of paths starting at S1 to Sn and ending at E1 to En. Right? So you fix a sigma, then you get, Si goes to E sub sigma I, and you are getting all possible sums, all possible paths are being counted over there, and you are giving some sign with it. Is that clear? So what we are doing is we are summing over all possible paths, and if you look at the left hand side, we are only getting non-intersecting lattice paths. So this is some this is the sum over permutations, but here this is the sum over only over non-intersecting lattice. So let's go from this sum to that sum. So it's clear that each family is counted here. Right? Each family starts at some Si and ends at some Ej, and okay, I should not say it that way. So each family starts at Si, ends at E sigma I for some sigma, and that is contained inside this P. Okay, but they are not at this moment non-intersecting. So now, how do we get to non-intersecting? The idea is that we will is to find an involution on this set of these paths that will cancel all these all families where there is some intersection. So this is a standard idea in computer, right? So let me explain this. So we will find a weight preserving but sign reversing involution on the set of all families which will cancel the contribution of paths where there is an intersection. Is any intersection. Okay, that's the idea. So let me explain this now. So remember that in any path family there could be multiple intersections. So we need to find find a canonical description, or our algorithm should find a canonical intersection and there are many ways to do it. So let's do it in using lexicographic order. So suppose A is the smallest integer such that PA has an intersection. So paths P1 up to PA minus 1 do not intersect with anybody. Okay, they don't talk to anybody. And now B is the smallest integer such that PA and PB intersect. Okay. Another way of saying this is if I take pairs Pi, Pj and order them in, if I treat them as a word, then in dictionary order, this is the smallest. Okay. So this fixes something. Okay. So now let me draw a cartoon of this. The intersection. So I should use colors, or maybe not. Okay. So here is let's say SA, and here is SB, and here is E sigma A, and here is E sigma B, and let's say SA does something, and SB does something like that. I don't know. Okay, they could remember that they could potentially intersect in many places. Okay. So now here is SA and SB. So suppose so let P sub A comma 1 and P sub A comma 2 be the part of PA and PB respectively before the last intersection. Okay, so here is the last intersection. Okay, so mark it over here, and okay, so now how okay, so okay, you know what I should have done? I should have used another color. So okay, now what did I do? I went like that. Okay, so this is SA and this is SB, and so I'm calling this part of SA, which is all the way up from starting up to this pink X. I'm calling that PA1, and similarly this blue path starting at SB and ending at that pink cross is PA2. Similarly, sorry, it should be PB1. Of course, I mean A1 is the part initial up to the X, and B is the initial part, PB. So similarly, let PA2 and PB2 be the rest of the parts. Respective. So this part is PA2 and this part is PB2. Okay, I hope it's clear. Okay, so now here is the involution. I mean, many of you already see it. So let P hat S be PS1 union or concatenated with PT2. PA be P hat A be PA1 with PB2, and P hat B with PB1 concatenated with PA2. Okay, so let me. So this is PA and this is here's the color PB. And now I'm going to do the integration. Okay, so now I'm going to, since I'm already in blue, let me sort of try and mimic what I did. So this part is identical. Okay, that should have been, I suppose. Okay, maybe I should also do this. So this should be E sigma A. Oh, sorry. Oh no, that is correct. So here I should have done it. So this is SB and E sigma B. And this is SB again and E sigma A. Okay, I mean, it took me more time to draw this than to explain the idea. I mean, it's really elementary idea. So you just have to find a canonical way of switching the things. Now, what happens to the weights? Well, the weights of the paths are products of the weights, and the weights of each, I mean, the weight of a path is the product of the edge weights. So the edges have not changed. So if sorry, I should have. Okay. Sorry, I should have set some notation earlier. So let P, which was P1 to Pn, be an intersecting path. Where Pi ends at E sigma r. So sine of P is sine of psi. Okay. Okay, so now let P prime be P1 up to Pa minus 1, P hat A, Pa plus 1 up to Pb minus 1, P hat B, Pb plus 1 up to Pa. So your only thing that has changed is these two. So then, as I just said, the weight of P prime is the weight of P, no change because the edges remain the same. What about sine of P prime? But sine of P prime is what? This is this is minus sine P because the new permutation sigma prime for P prime is obtained from sigma by a transposition. By a single transposition. Right? So we switched sigma A and sigma B, that's the only thing we did. Right? So this is, and it's clear that it's an involution. If I started with this path, again A and B would be the same. Remember, we chose A and B in this particular way. They would still be the same. And then you would choose the last point of intersection, which would be X, and then you would switch the two and you would go back. So this is precisely the involution. So, and these two paths are distinct. You cannot, I mean, this involution has no fixed points. So maybe I'll send it also. It is clear. This involution has no fixed points, and so when we sum over all possible NILPs over here, we will cancel pairwise any two, we'll cancel pairwise paths which have any intersection. Right? So thus we will cancel pairwise all the contribution from all intersecting path families, and we obtain the to each, the LHS is the sign of P times the weight of P summed over all non-intersecting lattice paths, and the sign of P is the sign of sigma, so that's the same, and this is the weight of P. So that completes the proof. Any questions about this proof? As I said, the idea is elementary, but but it's really powerful. Okay, so so an important corollary of this result is will be relevant to us. So this is the simplest form of the LGB gamma. So suppose G is such that the only NILPs are from SI to EI for all I. Then this determinant of Pij gives the weighted sum over all NILPs. Then only the identity permutation is going to contribute over there in this sum, and so the sign is always +1, and so you're going to get the weighted sum. Right? So then this determinant, even though it has signs, will give a manifestly positive contribution. I mean, will give a manifestly positive answer, and that will be the weighted sum over all non-intersecting participants. Okay. So this is not as far-fetched as you might think. So the application of this is for planar graphs. So this corollary works for or is useful for planar graphs, right? Such as what we saw in the last class. So you have starting points, ending points, and you know the only ways you can have the starting points connect to the ending points in a way that's non-intersecting is if they just match in the corresponding way. Okay. Oh. Okay. So couple of caveats though. I mean, so okay. Let me. Later on I'll give one more warning, but for now note that the result does not hold if we have directed cycles in G, or if G has directed cycles. So can you see why that is? So if you think about how the proof works, how this involution works, we need the fact that every point is visited at most once. We should be able to say precisely what happens after this. If you can loop around this point x many times, then you cannot make sense of this, and this involution cannot be defined. There is a generalization to such cases due to Fumi, but then the answers are more complicated. Okay, so I want to give an example. I want to give an application of this result to what are called watermelon configurations. You will see why the name is. Maybe you'll see it, but I'll explain the reason for the name later. So I need some terminology to define what these are. So let me start with an important combinatorial object called a dig path. So dig path so this is a path in Z2 square lattice starting from let's say I1J1 and ending in some other point I2J2 and using steps which are 1, 1 and 1 minus 1. So this is like a northeast step and this is a southeast step. Okay. So it looks like so. So you go. So you go at 45 degrees like that. Okay. So we will focus on so you see the paths have a drift, so they go rightwards, but they can go up and down. So you can always choose to start at some fixed left position, but we can't do so for the right position because of what I'm going to say just now. So we will focus on our starting point being 0, I, and our ending position I2J2 to be 2n, j, and we want the path to stay in the first quadrant, so on or above the x-axis. Okay. So so that is so we will start here. So this is 0, I, and we'll end at some point. So 2n, j, and you're allowed to touch but not go below the x-axis. Okay, so this is touching but not below. Okay, so you want to count how many such paths are there, and I'll tell you the motivation in a second. So let n sub 2n of ij be the number of such paths. Okay. So if you did not impose this restriction of not going below the x-axis, can you tell me how many paths there are? So without the restriction, the number of such paths is what? So remember, we are still taking steps 1, 1 and 1 minus 1. So, and of course, I should have said, note that I and j have the same parity, have to have, otherwise there's no such path, right? Because what is conserved in this is the parity of the coordinates I1 plus I1. So each time you add, you're adding 1 to both, or you're adding 1 and subtracting 1. So the parity of I1 plus j1 has to be the same as that of id plus j2. So therefore I and j have to be the same. Okay, so let's assume I and j have the same parity. Then how many paths are there? Anyone?
Maybe 2n choose n plus j minus 1.
Close. Yes, you're on the right track. Yes. So okay. So Mohit is almost right. So can you tell us how you came by that answer?
So first, we're gonna make like each step you can just think of it as left or right, and we have to make 2n such steps, right? And our total
Why do you
drift
have
is
to
j
make 12
minus,
steps?
because at each time you're traveling towards the right side. You cannot travel to the left side
That's
at
right.
all.
Right. So let's okay. Let me is as follows. So the total number of steps is 2n. Yes, go on, Mohit.
So after this, so in the total number of steps, there are two types of steps. One is
Yes.
like going up and one is coming down. But
Yes.
if you see, if you just consider up and downs, the total thing you need in the end is like you need to go down by I minus j, right?
Yes,
So
or go up by j minus I. Yes.
correct. So if we consider them as up and down vectors, if we add all those to n, essentially we can think of them as 1 minus 1s. So if we
Yes.
add them up, 2n such 1 and minus 1s, we should get I minus j.
Well, j minus I. But yeah, that's the idea. So suppose there are a steps, a this steps and b this steps, then a plus b is 2n, total number of steps is 2n, and a minus b is the net drift upwards, right? And you want that net drift upwards to be equal to j minus I. If it's negative, it's negative, and then b is null. Right? So you want to reach from I to j, and you have this net drift, and then you solve. So so a is whatever 2 n plus j minus I by 2. And b is n minus j minus I. Okay, and so the total number of steps is 2n choose n plus j minus I. Very good. So, but okay, that only gives the total number of steps. I mean, but remember, we want this restriction. So there's a beautiful way of getting this due to, so it's called the reflection formula. So let me state it as a lemma. So this is not the original proof of. So this was due to this French mathematician called Désiré André, but it's it has been given his name, but people have read through his proof and they say no, it's not exactly the same, but the name has stuck. Fortunately. Okay, so it's called the reflection principle, and the idea is a very nice bijection. So paths going in such paths, okay, or Dick paths. going from 0i to 2nj that go below the x-axis are in bijection with paths that go from 0i to 2n minus j minus 2. Okay, and here I'm assuming j is non-negative. Okay, so the reflection principle tells you the idea. I mean, you might have seen such things in other contexts also. So, I mean, this is a proof by words, a proof without words. So here I'll take a path. Oh, actually, maybe I should use the graph. So, an authentic. Okay, so what I'm going to do is a dashed line at x equal to minus 1. Now let's construct a path. Okay, maybe I'll use okay, something like that. So, okay, I've taken that it starts at the, oh, damn. Okay, so this is I and this is J. This is I and this is J. So it maybe I'll go. Okay, something like that. Okay, and what is the involution? So, okay, so okay, now I'll use another color. Pink. So because the path goes below the x-axis, it has to hit this line x equal to minus 1, right? So after that you do a reflection about that line. Okay. So let's look at that. So here I'm going to now go up. So I'm reflecting only the part after the first time it hits the line x equal to minus 1. Then I go below. So here, so j was equal to 1. And okay, so I think I'm done with the figures. So back here. So this is now j equal to minus 3. And I remains the same. And that's the idea. Okay, so maybe I can use some words. So reflect the part of the path So this is x equal to minus 1. After the first contact, oh sorry, this is y equal. With the line y equals minus 1, about that. So this is the bijection. Let me go back to, okay, this. So why is this approved? Well, so it's select relations I and J. So you're going to start here, you're going to end here. If this path goes below the line y equals minus 1, it has to hit it. When you do this reflection, can you see why this has to end at necessarily end at the same point, no matter what the path is after reflection? So if it ends at 2n j initially, it will end at 2n minus j minus 2. Why? Anybody? Yes.
The initial path goes from the reflection point, it eventually goes up j plus 1 steps. So the reflected one will go j plus 1
Yeah.
steps below this line.
Below, right, that's right. So you subtract j plus 1 from minus 1 and you get this. Exactly. And conversely, if you have a path over here starting from I and going 0i and going to 2n minus j minus 2, it necessarily has to pass through the point y equals minus 1 because j is greater than or equal to 0, so minus j minus 2 is less than or equal to minus 2. And so it has to cross that line, and once it crosses that line, you do the reflection, which is going to give you the opposite of this, the inverse map. Okay, so why was this considered? So this was called the ballot problem. So context. So this was called the ballot problem. So suppose there are two candidates A and B in an election. With A and B getting P and Q votes respectively, and P greater than Q. Okay, so A wins the election. So the question that was asked was to find the probability that A always stayed ahead of B during the counting process. So when you are tallying the votes, you pick up one vote, one ballot at a time, and you want to ask, I mean, A won eventually, but what is the probability that as you were counting, A was always ahead or equal to B? I mean, this ahead has to be taken as weakly ahead. Okay, so it turns out that the answer is surprisingly simple. It's P minus Q by 3. And one can prove it by what I'm the corollary of the reflection principle that I'm using this time. So the idea is that if I take the difference of the votes of A minus votes of B at any process, I will get a Dicke path. And if we start at the origin, then yeah, so with I equals 0. Right? So then you, and J being therefore equal to P minus 2. Okay, so this is the idea. So this was how it came up. So the corollary to the reflection principle above is that n2n of AB, ij, sorry, this was the number of paths that start at 0i, end at 2nj, and that stay above, on or above the x-axis. So what we are going to obtain is, we know the total number of paths, which is this binomial coefficient, and any path that deviates from this has to cross the line y equal to -1, and then it's in bijection with paths that start from 0i and end at 2n minus j minus 2. And that's another similar binomial coefficient computation. So it's a difference of binomial coefficient. So this is the first one that we calculated, and 2n choose n plus j minus n over 2 minus 2n choose n plus, you just replace j by minus j minus 2, so you will get j plus I plus 2. Okay. So it's a simple difference of two binomial coefficients. Okay. Let us see one special case, which I will call a theorem. So a special case, it's a very important special case, very important. Is when I equal to j equal to 0. So I'll call this a theorem simply because of its importance. So n2n 0 0. So you plug in I and j to be 0. So you get first term is 2n choose n, and the second term is 2n choose n plus 1. And if you simplify, so you take 2n factorial common upstairs, n factorial, there are two n factorials here, there's an n plus 1 factorial, n minus 1 factorial. So if I take n factorial and n plus 1 factorial common, here I'll have an n plus 1 to cancel this n plus 1 factorial, and here I will have an n to cancel this n, so minus n. So that cancels, and so this is equal to 1 by n plus 1 to n choose. Okay, and this is probably the single most important combinatorial sequence. These are called the Catalan numbers. So these, if we go back to the interpretation of n2n, these are paths starting at the origin, ending on the x-axis, while staying on or above the x-axis. Okay. There are several ways of counting this. This is probably the simplest. And the reflection principle is probably the simplest proof. This is already, it's a bit non-trivial that these numbers are integers, because we are dividing by n+1. But more importantly, they have many combinatorial interpretations. They have several interpretations. Some are almost obvious from this context. Let me give you a few examples. So one is you can consider words in the set I'm saying this is an open parenthesis and this is a closed parenthesis, which are quote unquote legal. That is, for every pair of parentheses, the open comes before the close. So, for example, you can do open, close, open, open, close, close. That's okay. What is not okay is open, close, close, which are legal with n of each. Okay, so you have n open parentheses, n close parentheses. This is not okay because it has more closed than opens. Right? I mean, it's clear about that. And if you think a bit, you can see a bijection with these paths. But here's a more non-trivial case. Binary trees with n leaves. Let's say complete binary trees. That is to say, every node has two descendants. One of them whom could be, I think there may be a shift here. It could be n plus 2 leaves. Let's see. So with no, it's not. So the first case is this. So that is 3 leaves, 2 leaves, and there is 1. So I think it's n plus. And there's 1. It has 2. So this is more non-trivial. Another non-trivial example is matchings. Remember we talked about matchings when we were talking about the Pfaffian. If you consider non-crossing matchings, so you remember you have one. So 1, 2, etc. 2n minus 1, 2n, and you match such that you never intersect. Oh, I can't do that. Like that. Then this is also counted. So in fact, there are so many that in Stanley's book on enumerative combinatorics, there are more than 200 combinatorial objects which are counted by the Catalan numbers. And some of them the bijections are easy between one family and the other. For some they're quite hard. And in fact, he also has a recent book on the Catalan numbers, just describing various problems and various relations to different things. And it's almost an axiom, unwritten rule, that any quote-unquote interesting combinatorial family has inside it the Catalan numbers somehow. It just turns out this is a really remarkable family. So I can show you on Sage. So Sage has Catalan numbers built in. So I can show you what the sequence looks like for n range 20, let's say. So the first few numbers, I mean, people like me who work on combinatorics, I mean, we have memorized, it's automatically for us memorized the first few, 10 or so numbers. So I wrote a program to implement this Andre's formula. So I can show you that also. So Andre of Nij returns the number of dig paths from 0i to 2nj while staying above the x-axis. And I have, in case you're not familiar with writing error messages in Sage, you use the command raise and you raise, say, value error, and you enter whatever phrase you want. So if I and j don't have the same parity, then I return an error. So I can show you what it looks like. So if I do Andre, and I'm always taking 2n steps. So n doesn't have any constraint. So I can do 4, let's say 0, 3. So I get a value that I and j must have same parity. If I do 4, 0, 2, I get 28. But remember, 4 means it's, it's going up to, it's going from the origin to 8, 2, not 4. So here I constructed the matrix of these entries going from 0, I equal to 0 to 2j, and j and n running from 0 to 8. And you can see that it's a lower triangular matrix. Can you see why it is lower triangular? I mean, why are all these zeros? Anybody? So n is the row index and j is the column.
You can't go above n comma n.
Right, 2n comma 2n, yes. So yeah, so you can't go too high for any fixed n, and you can't go too low. So that gives this sequence. So let me tell you something else about this sequence. So if I write these numbers in diagonal form, okay, so if I look at each diagonal and I enumerate the numbers, and I will write them from right to left. So there's an important triangle of numbers. This is called the Ballot sequence or Ballot numbers. Just a second. Yeah. So let me also tell you about the Ballot triangle, which comes up here. So each of those numbers is actually, this formula that we have simplifies. So it has a Pascal-like recurrence. So let me just write it. So C and I, let's say. So for 0 less than 1 less than 9. So it starts 1, 2, 2. So I'm okay. Let me write the first few numbers. So this is n, this is I, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what I did was write these numbers over here, and I added an extra column. So this 1, 2 over here is this 1, 2, and then this there's 3 5 there's actually 1 3 5 and that's that, and then 1 4 9 and so on, and I padded it in some appropriate way, and this sequence is called the Ballot triangle, and the way you describe it is that each entry is the sum of the entry to its left and above. So in Pascal's triangle you would sum the two consecutive entries above, but here you are going to sum the one left and above. And you know, if you imagine that there is beyond these things is a bunch of zeros, then this one also makes sense because it's a 0 plus 1. And these numbers also make sense because if you imagine this is zeros outside, then this 5 is this 5 plus this 0. Okay, like that. And the formula for that, Cni, is n minus I plus 1 divided by n plus 1, n plus I. Okay. And so these sum to the Catalan numbers. So this sum here is 1, then 2, then 5, 14. I think I have made a mistake here. Yeah, no, I think it's okay. So, so these have so the interpretation for these C and I's, C and I is the number of big paths from 0 0 to n0 touching, oh well, staying above the x-axis, of course. Staying on or above the x-axis and touching the x-axis I times in the interior. No. So, so the sums of these are, of course, when you sum over all possible I, you get the total number of paths, which is, of course, the Catalan number. But also this diagonal is the Catalan number, and also the diagonal below it is the Catalan number. Okay, so these are another nice related family of Catalan-related objects, of Catalan-related sequences, and these are precisely the numbers that occur. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. So I haven't yet gotten to watermelon configurations, which is what was my application, but I will get to that in the next class. Okay, so let me stop recording.